Chapter 12 of Blackbeard, Buccaneer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Beeswax Candle. Blackbeard, Buccaneer by Ralph D. Paine. A private account to settle. The ship's boat was bound into the bay, probably to lie there for daybreak, and Jack Cockerell rushed down to the beach, where he set up such a frantic hullabaloo that the sailors ceased singing and held their breath, and their oars suspended. They had come to look for Bill Saxby and Trimble Rogers, but this was a strange voice. It was so odd a circumstance that several of them hailed the shore with questions loud and perplexed. "Master John Cockerell at your service," came back the reply. "Captain Bonnet knows me. I am the lad that clouted a 6-foot pirate of yours for being saucy to a maid in Charlestown." This aroused a roar of laughter, and the gusty shouts of, "Is that same Will Brant in the boat with us? He shakes in his boots at the sound of ye." "What's the game, lad? Have you taken a ship of your own to scour the Maine?" Jack ignored this good-natured badinage, and in dignified accents told them to come ashore and take him off to the Royal James. In this company he had a reputation to live up to as a man of parts and valour. They let the boat ground on the smooth sand, and one of them lighted a torch of pitch-pine splinters. The fine young gentleman who had strolled arm in arm with Stede Bonnet to the Tavern Green was a ragged scarecrow and bedaubed with red clay and black mud. This aroused their sympathy before he told them of his escape from the Revenge and his adventures with Bill Saxby and the crippled Buccaneer. In their turn, they explained how Captain Bonnet had sent them down the river to await the return of the two men who were now stranded in the wilderness 2 days' march distant. "And why did your captain shift the brig from her anchorage off the island?" asked Jack. This amused the boat's crew, who nudged each other and were evasive, till the master's mate, who was in charge, went far enough to say, "A sloop came in from the Pamlico River. Our ship sought a snugger harbour, d'ye see. There was some private business. We loaded the sloop with hogshead of sugar and bolts of damask and silver ingots. His Excellency, Governor Eden, of the North Carolina province, turns an honest penny now and then." "The governor of this province is a partner in piracy?" cried Jack. "Brawl it not so loud, nor spit it to Captain Bonnet," cautioned the master's mate. "I confide this much to stave off your foolish questions when you board the ship." There was no reason to tarry in the bay, and the boat pulled out to follow the course of the river and return in haste to the brig Royal James in her more secluded harbour. The news that Blackbeard was at his old rendezvous within easy sail to the southward eclipsed all other topics, and when it was learned that he had lost the 2 sloops of his squadron, there was fierce delight. Although the Revenge was a larger vessel and more heavily manned and gunned, they were hilariously confident of victory. It was a burning grudge and a private quarrel, and fuel was added to the flame by the tidings that a score or more of seamen had been mercilessly marooned to perish because of their suspected preference for Captain Stede Bonnet. When Jack Cockerell caught sight of the shapely brig as she loomed in the morning haze, it seemed as though years had passed since he had endlessly watched her pass out over the Charlestown bar. Presently he spied the soldierly captain on the quarter-deck, his spare figure all taut and erect, his chin clean-shaven, his queue powdered, his apparel fresh and in good taste. A ship is like her master, and the watch was sluicing down decks or setting up the rigging which had slackened with the heavy dew. Jack felt ashamed to let himself be seen. This was no place for a ragamuffin. Captain Bonnet strode to the gangway and stared down at this bit of human flotsam. He was quick to recognize his boyish friend and admirer, and ordered the men to lower a boatswain's chair and lift Master Cockerell aboard. Jack was, indeed, so stiffened and sore and weary that he had been wondering how he could climb the side of a ship. "My son, bide your time," exclaimed Stede Bonnet as they met on deck. "Tell it later. The master's mate will enlighten me." He led the way into the cabin, which was in order and simply furnished. One servant brewed fragrant coffee from Arabia, while another made a room ready for the guest, and fetched clean clothing from the captain's chests in a tub of hot water. and as soon as the grateful Master Cockerel had made himself presentable, he was invited to sit down at table with the captain and enjoy a meal of porridge and crisp English bacon and fresh eggs from the ship's hen coop in the long-boat, and hot crumpets and marmalade. And this after the pinched ration of mouldy salt horse and wormy hard bread. Captain Bonnet lighted a roll of tobacco leaves, which he called a cigarro, and puffed clouds of smoke, while Master Cockerel cleaned every dish, and lamented that his skin felt too tight to begin all over again. He was now in a mood to relate his strange yarn from its outset in the ill-fated merchant trader Plymouth adventure. Eagerly he begged information concerning her people after their shipwreck, but Captain Bonnet had been cruising far offshore to intercept a convoy of rich West Indiamen from Jamaica for the old country. "I will make it my duty to set you ashore at Charlestown, Master Jack," said he, "and I pray you may find your good uncle alive and still vowing to hang all rogues of pirates." "But I must sail with you, sir, till you have saved Joe Hawkridge and his shipmates and blown Blackbeard out of water." "Rest easy on that," exclaimed Stede Bonnet. "Those affairs are most urgent. My ship will drop down the river to-day with the turn of the tide, and heave to long enough to land a party, 6 men, to go in search of Trimble Rogers, who is the apple of my eye. I shall not ask you to join them, but you can give directions and pen a fair map, I trow." "Gladly would I go," replied Jack, "but my poor legs wobble like your valiant old Buccaneers, and my feet are raw." "You have proved yourself," was the fine compliment. "I judged ye aright when we first met." Soon the deck above them resounded to the tramp of boots and the thump of sheet-blocks as the brisk seamen made ready to cast the ship free. She was in competent hands, and so Stede Bonnet lingered below to enjoy talking with the youth, whose manners and breeding were like his own. In a mood unusually confidential, he confirmed Jack's earlier impressions, that he was a pirate with a certain code of honour, which reminded one of Robin Hood of Sherwood Forest, who robbed the rich and befriended the poor. Touching on his mortal quarrel with Blackbeard, he revealed how that traitorous ruffian had proposed a partnership while he, Stede Bonnet, was a novice at the trade. The plot all hatched to take Bonnet's fine ship, the Revenge, from him. Blackbeard had disclosed his hand at the final conference, when he said with a sarcastic grimace, "I see, my good sir, that you are not used to the cares and duties of commanding a vessel, so I will relieve you of them." As soon as Captain Bonnet had mended his fortunes and had the goodly brig Royal James to cruise in, his ruling purpose was to regain the Revenge from Blackbeard, and at the same time wreak a proper punishment. "So now, if we can trap this black-hearted Teach before he flits to sea," said Stede Bonnet, "you will see a pretty engagement, Master Cockerel. But first we must find the score of men that he marooned. 'Twill be a deed of mercy, besides affording me a stronger crew." The brig was soon standing down the river, while the landing party broke out an ample store of provisions and powder and ball, with canvas for a tent. The plan was for them to pitch a camp near the shore of the bay, to which they could fetch back Trimble Rogers and Bill Saxby, and there wait for their ship to return and take them off. They were ready to go ashore, when Captain Bonnet's navigator ordered the main topsail laid aback, and the brig slowly swung into the wind. The delay was brief, and no sooner was the boat cast off than the Royal James proceeded on the voyage to Cherokee Inlet. Clumsy as those sailing ships of 200 years ago appear to modern eyes, their lines were finely moulded under water, and with a favouring wind they could log a fair distance in a day's run. It goes without saying that this tall brig was shoved along for all she was worth before a humming breeze that made her creak, and during the night she was reckoned to be a few miles to seaward of the Sandy Islands, which extended like a barrier outside of Cherokee Inlet. Jack Cockerel stood a watch of his own, dead weary, but with no thought of sleep, until he could hear the lookout shout, "Land ho!" This cry came from aloft soon after dawn. The brig moved toward the nearest of these exposed shoals, while her officers consulted a chart spread upon the cabin roof. They were weary of running the ship aground with Blackbeard no more than a few miles distant. So bare were these yellow patches of sand that showed against the green water, that a group of men on any one of them would have been easily discernible. The Royal James coasted along outside of them under shortened sail, but discovered nothing to indicate a party of marooned seamen. "But they must be out here somewhere," cried Jack Cockerell in great distress. "They ought to be, for no trading vessel would take 'em off," replied the puzzled Captain Bonnet. "If they were towed out in boats, as you say, Jack, these islands must have been where they were beached." "But you won't give up the search, sir, without another tack past these outermost shoals?" "Oh, we shall rake them all. But Blackbeard may have changed that crotchety mind of his and taken the men back to his ship." "I fear I have seen the last of my dear Joe Hawkridge," exclaimed Jack. "From what you tell me, the young scamp is not so easily disposed of," smiled Captain Bonnet. "I must haul out to sea ere long. 'Tis poor business to let Blackbeard glimpse my spars and so take warning." This was sad news, and Jack walked away to hide his quivering lip. To examine the islands again was a forlorn hope, because it already seemed certain that nothing alive moved on any of them. The brig passed them closer than before as she made a long reach before turning out to sea. It was the intention to sail in to engage Blackbeard very early the next morning, and meanwhile he would be vigilantly blockaded. Even Jack Cockerell, hopeful to the last, was compelled to agree with the crew of the brig that not a solitary man could be seen on these sea-girt quays, and it seemed hopeless to send off a boat to explore them one by one. There would be some stir or signal, even if men were too weak to stand. The air was clear. From the brig's masts it was possible to sweep every foot of sandy surface. Here was another mystery of the sea. It occurred to Stede Bonnet to ask, "You took it for granted they were marooned, Jack, when the boats passed from your sight and you were hidden in the tree in the swamp? What if a quicker death were dealt them?" "That may be, sir." The brig was leaving the coast astern. Jack moped by himself until his curiosity was drawn to a group of seamen upon the forecastle head who were talking loudly and pointing at something in the water, well ahead of the ship. One vowed it was a big sea turtle asleep. Another was willing to wager his silver-mounted pistols that it was a rum barrel, while a third announced that he'd stake his head on its being a mermaid or her husband. The afterdeck brought a spy-glass to bear, and perceived that the thing was splashing about. The tiller was shifted to bring it close aboard, and soon Captain Bonnet exclaimed that it was, indeed, a merman, a-cruising with a cask. Jack Cockerell scampered to the heel of the bowsprit to investigate this ocean prodigy, and as the cask drifted nearer, he saw that Joe Hawkridge was clinging to it. There was no mistaking that dauntless grin and mop of carroty hair. A handy seaman tossed a bight of line over his shoulders as he bobbed past the forefoot of the brig, and was yanked bodily over the bulwark like a strange species of fish. Flopping on deck, he waved a skinny arm in greeting, and then Jack Cockerell rushed at him, lifted him bodily, and dragged him to the cabin. "What ho, comrade!" said the dripping merman. "Blast my eyes, but I was sick with worry for you. I left you in that swamp, and I thought you dead, Joe. For the love of heaven, tell me how you fared and what—" Captain Bonnet interfered to say, "I treated you more courteously than this, Jack. Let us make him comfortable." Accepting the rebuke, Jack bustled his amazing friend into a change of clothes and saw that he was well fed. Little the worse for his watery pilgrimage, Joe Hawkridge explained at his leisure. "Nick Rackham took the others away in the snow, as I tell you, Captain Bonnet, and there was I in the doleful dumps. Prayers get answered, and miracles do happen, for next day there came a-floating to the beach a cask full of grub and water. Good Peter Toby, the carpenter's mate, had a hand in launching it, no doubt, but the Lord hisself steered the blessed cask. Well, while I sat a-giving thanks and thinking one thing and another, I figured that when I'd ate all the grub and swigged the water, I was no further along." "And so you thought you would trust the Lord again?" suggested Captain Bonnet. "Aye, sir, that was it. By watching the tides, I reckoned I might drift to another island, and so work to the coast, taking my provisions with me. There was some small line in the task that Peter Toby had wrapped the stores in, and I knitted a harness about the cask that I could slip an arm in, and off I goes when the tide sets right. But some kind of dratted cross-current catched me, and I'm sailing out to sea, I finds, without compass or cross-staff, Bound to get to London River, eh, Jack? Same as we started out on the silly little raft." "Phew! This adventure was bad enough," cried Jack. "But when you saw Nick Rackham's pirates in the boat and you couldn't run away, I wonder, honest, Joe, you didn't die of fright."
"What for? This is no trade for a nervous wight. And now for a bloody frolic with Blackbeard's bullies."
"There's a share of his treasure for you, Joe, as soon as we can go find it," gleefully announced Master Cockerel. "I have the chart drawn all true with mine own hand. Let me get it." While the two lads pored entranced over the map of the branching creek and the pine-covered knoll, the crew of the Royal James were overhauling weapons and clearing the ship for action. It disappointed them to lack the 20 men whom they expected to find marooned, but this made them no less eager for battle. Concerning Ned Rackham, there was no feud with him or grudge to square, and he could go his way in the little trading snow without fear of molestation from Stede Bonnet. Under cover of night, the Royal James worked back to the Sandy Islands and anchored in the channel. One of her boats had ventured within sight of the inlet for a stealthy reconnaissance, and reported that the Revenge was still in the harbour. Captain Bonnet was considering his plan of attack. He said nothing about it to Jack Cochrane and his chum, the merman, and they greedily listened to the gossip of the petty officers or thrashed out theories of their own. To sail boldly into the harbour was a ticklish risk to run, as there was no pilot aboard who knew the inner channel and the depths of water. All the gunners were in favour of attempting it, because they yearned to settle it with crashing broadsides, but the battered, hairy sea dogs, who had fought it out in hand-to-hand conflicts on the Caribbean, were for leaving the brig in safe water and sending 50 men in boats to board the Revenge at the first break of day. In the middle of the forecastle argument, Captain Bonnet sent for Jack Cockerel and told him, "You are to keep out of harm's way, my young gamecock. I have undertaken to deliver you to your esteemed uncle with arms and legs intact, and your head on your shoulders."
"But I'm lusty enough to poke about with a pike or surf with a gun tackle,"
protested the unhappy Master Cockerel. "I expect you to obey me," was the stern mandate. "You will have company. This Joe Hawkridge is to stay with you."
"But he's a rare hand in a fight, Captain Bonnet. Should have seen him in the Plymouth Adventure."
"The boy is weak and all unstrung, though he carries it bravely, Jack, and Blackbeard's men would take special pains to kill him as a deserter." By this humane verdict, the two lads were shielded from peril, as far as it lay within Stede Bonnet's power. They should have felt grateful to him, but on the contrary it made them quite peevish, and they sulked by themselves up in the bow of the ship till it was time to eat again. Then their gnawing appetites persuaded them to forgive their considerate host. The pirates moved about the deck until far into the night, and the sparks flew from cutlass blades pressed to the whirling grindstone. Tubs were filled with hand grenades and fire pots, the decks strewn with sand, the magazine opened and powder passed up. Stede Bonnet was careful to see for himself that all things were in order. At such times he was a martinet of a soldier. Anxiously he watched the weather signs, as did every seasoned sailor on board. It bade fair to be a bright morning with an easterly air, and this would carry the brig into the harbour with the minimum danger of stranding if the lead was cast often enough. Joe Hawkridge and Jack Cockerel were of some assistance in explaining the marks and bearings of the channel, and Captain Bonnet consulted them over the chart unrolled upon the cabin table. He had made up his mind to sail the brig in and risk the hazards of shoal water. When he went on deck, Jack thought of a topic as thrilling as this imminent duel between ships, and he remarked with joyous excitement, "Now, Joe, as soon as ever Blackbeard gets his drubbing, we beg a boat and men and gear of Captain Bonnet, and go up the creek to fish out the treasure chest and dig in the knoll."
"Hook your fish before you fry 'em," replied the sagacious apprentice boy. "This scrummage with the Revenge will be no dancing heel and toe. A bigger ship, more guns and men, and a Blackbeard who will fight like a demon when he's cornered. Crazy though he may be, he's the most dangerous pirate afloat."
End of chapter 12.